The Franciscan friars, who were entrusted with many of New Mexico's mission churches, needed sacred images for the sanctuaries and for people's homes. In 16th and 17th century Europe, however, paintings were being done on freshly plastered walls or on canvas stretched on a wooden frame. Also, wooden panels were also used. But in colonial New Mexico, canvas was scarce and lumber mills had not been introduced. As a consequence, the earliest Christian sacred images from this region that we have are paintings on animal hides. They show a marked refinement of skill and continuity with the Baroque and later Christian iconographic tradition. And these are among the earliest and rarest of the Western style art made in what is today the United States. In the mid to late 1700s, hide paintings began to be replaced by wooden panels painted with natural pigments on homemade gesso. These paintings on wood came to be known as retablos since they were primarily used to adorn the wooden screen behind the altar in the church building, and the screen is known as the Reredo. These beautiful wooden panel paintings soon became widespread throughout New Mexico, not only in church buildings, but also in the private chapels and family prayer corners at home, also called the altarcitos. This iconographic tradition is a descendant from the Spanish Baroque, but it also bears unique qualities that, by necessity, led New Mexicans to let go of the excesses of the Baroque and rediscover the core iconography underneath. Families gathered together in prayer in front of their simple but powerful santos at home with candles lit and offered their supplications to heaven through the image of their santo. Here, on the edge of Christian civilization, the tradition of prayer before images of Christ and the saints has lived on. Many retablos that survive from this period bear witness to this devotion by burn marks left by lit candles on the bottom edges. When speaking of retablos, it's helpful to distinguish between four similar types. In South America, there's the Peruvian retablo, which appears more like an ornately decorated cabinet than a single board, like in New Mexico. Although it also descends from the Spanish Baroque, it features small sculpted figurines arranged in scenes from the Bible or the lives of the saints. There are also two other devotional painting forms found in Old Mexico, known as the láminas and the ex votos. Sometimes these are also called retablos. The láminas, however, are typically made of oil paint on tin sheets. They're the closest relatives to the New Mexican retablo tradition and often feature the same saints in the same poses, but they are characterized by retaining more of the Baroque style in ornamentation and technique. And while painted on tin with oil paint like the láminas, the ex voto retablos serve a different purpose. They are primarily offerings of thanksgiving for favors received from heaven. Ex votos depict scenes from the ordinary lives of ordinary people in which a saint intervenes in an extraordinary way. Examples include being saved from drowning by the miraculous appearance of the Blessed Virgin Mary, being healed of a disease, or being led to safety in the wilderness by an angel. These are often made after the event and placed in the shrine of the patron saint to fulfill a promise of honoring their help. While all of these devotional art forms may be called retablos, today we are talking about the retablo tradition of New Mexico. In the New Mexican Santero or saint making tradition, there are two major art forms, the retablos that we've been talking about and the bultos. While the retablos are painted on a flat ponderosa pine board, traditionally adzed by hand since there were no mills, the bultos are figurative wooden statues made of pine, fir, or even cottonwood. Many historic santeros are known to have made both retablos and bultos for private domestic use, as well as larger scale versions for use in the reredos and the village church building. In this way, the reredos become the culmination of the santero tradition or its highest expression. The reredo is the natural habitat of the retablo and the bulto. New Mexico's historic reredos are amazing work of art that inspire awe and manifest the devotion of the people who made them. The function of the Reredo is to focus attention on the most solemn ritual in the life of the New Mexican village, which is the sacred liturgy. There are many similarities between the Western Reredo and the Eastern iconostasis, but I'll leave that for another video. For now, it's enough to emphasize the importance of these two art forms as they converge in the highest action in the life of the community. The art form brought to New Mexico is a branch of the Spanish Colonial Baroque. It's the major historic style of art that characterizes what people typically think of as Latin American architecture and art. It emphasizes curving and spiraling ornamentation on classical forms in architecture and design. The pioneers of New Mexico based their art and architecture on what they saw and remembered from Old Mexico and Spain in the colonial period. These models include buildings like the cathedral in Mexico City, chalices like this one, and reredos like this one in the Canary Islands. And you'll notice some of these typical motifs include like this vase in the middle of the chalice stem. This knop looks kind of like a flower vase. Also, the Solomonic columns, which are the spiraling columns you see on this reredo. And then also, you'll see at times the lunette or like a flower on top of a frame. And in this case, you see a shield crest above, usually where you'll see a lunette at times. These are all Baroque motifs that you will see have been carried to New Mexico. The Hispanic pioneers came to the north by walking the Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, which linked Mexico City, which was the capital of New Spain, with Santa Fe, which is the capital of New Mexico. The journey was long and dangerous, about 1,600 miles over mountains and through deserts. From its founding in the late 1500s up to Mexican independence in the 1820s, this was the only approved and major route in or out of New Mexico. North of New Mexico was the imposing ice-capped Rocky Mountains. To the east was the endless plains. To the west and the south were the dry deserts. On all sides were hostile native nations. Like the Christian Irish and the Tewahedo Ethiopians, Hispanic New Mexicans saw themselves as the people on the edge of the Christian world. The artisans who made the retablos and bultos are known as santeros or saint makers and are highly esteemed in their communities. Often, as in the case of Jose Rafael Aragon, which is one of the greatest santeros in the tradition, the santeros were closely associated with carpenters, since both craftsmen worked in wood and were in high demand in colonial society. Santeros did not have ready access to oil paints and canvas to paint their sacred images, as was the leading fashion in Spain at the time. Nevertheless, they made excellent use of the local stones and minerals to create their own natural pigments. Red and yellow ochre, charcoal, and other minerals were utilized to give the retablos their characteristic earthy palette. There was an effort by the modern leader in retablo painting today, who is Charlie Carrillo, and he rediscovered the exact minerals or many of the exact minerals and locations from which the historic santeros sourced their pigments in the past. He went to great lengths to achieve this and even earned a master's degree, I believe, in geology to make sure he got the precise match with historic examples. Now let's look at some of the most beautiful and early examples of New Mexican retablos, and these date from the 18th and 19th century. Here's one of St. Christopher by Jose Rafael Aragon in the around 1800s, probably early 1800s here. It's found in the Museum of Spanish Colonial Art. Right away, you recognize St. Christopher if you know the iconographic tradition of a man or a giant. In the East, he sometimes appears as a dog-headed man even, but a kind of a giant, monstrous type figure who carries the infant Christ across the river. And as he's carrying the baby Christ, suddenly he gets so heavy, Christopher barely makes it. And he says, "Why did you grow so heavy? You're just a small child." And he says, "Because I was carrying the weight of the whole world on my shoulders." And you see this tradition, which is very ancient Christian tradition, survived all the way to New Mexico at this time on the edge of the Spanish Empire, and was transmitted in a recognizable form. And that's a key theme about the retablos, is that the saints, by and large, continue the same iconographic language with some local flair and local qualities. Another saint many people recognize is Saint Francis, a very popular saint in New Mexico because of the Franciscan missionaries who ministered to the people for about 300 years. St. Francis, also recognizable because of the stigmata on his hands, which are the wounds of Christ he received from Christ in a vision, and the characteristic blue habit of the Franciscans, which ministered to the people of New Mexico, um, is worn by St. Francis here. Even though it's an anachronism, Francis himself wore a brownish, grayish habit, but the blue habit was adopted by Franciscans much later, some Franciscans, to denote their promotion of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Mother. So they're known as the Conceptionist friars. As we go through, you'll notice some of the characteristics here of how the Santeros um, compose the facial features, the eyes, the beard, the postures. It's a simplification of the Baroque in a big way, and even the um, the specific ways the Santeros made their beards, for example, are indicators of who painted each piece. So Jose Rafael Aragon is famous for this type of beard where it's not quite connected at the chin. I think these are some of the most beautiful um, found in the Santero tradition, and have gone on to influence many Santeros that are practicing even today. Here's another famous saint in the Retablo tradition. This is San Juan Nepomuceno by Jose Rafael Aragon. Another common feature of the retablos of New Mexico are the curtains. You see, it's as if you're looking through a window and the curtains are being drawn back so you can see the santo, so you can see the saint. And often these decorative elements are sometimes known as space fillers, these dots, these triangles in the background, but they're abstract designs characteristic of the style. And in a way, it probably indicates the native decorative tradition as well in the retablos. Here's one by the Laguna Santero, who painted at the Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico. This is the Immaculate Conception um, around the year 1800. Again, it's recognizable. You see the moon at her feet, the angels or angel in some versions, just one. Her white dress and blue mantle. This is kind of a rare image with a border attached, a frame. Here's another one by Jose Rafael in a San Cayetano. Sometimes this is confused for Christ, and so maybe that's even why he spelled it out. Is that this is San Cayetano, not Christ crucified. Again, you see the curtains, and another indicator, a unique motif in Santero tradition are the steps, the stepped um, motifs you'll see on the corners here. Perhaps another native contribution to the retablo tradition. Here's another artist, Fresquis, and this is Our Lady Guadalupe, who is very popular throughout New Mexico. transmitted, of course, from Old Mexico. And you'll see just a beautiful, humble rendition of the famous image. Here's another one by Fresquis of St. John the Baptist, recognizable with his shell, with his clothing in camel skins or very lightly clothed, and with his staff in the water with local plants, local to New Mexico, depicted here. The border with these half moons is very interesting. The decoration in the retablos is also unique, but you see the common desire um, to ornament the borders and all the spaces of the retablo. But even here in this simple version, you see um, an ancient pattern of a square base or a rectangular base and a circular or dome-like top. Right? It's here just depicted as a simple line with a blue background filling out the rest of the rectangle. But you see that pattern continues here. It's the same pattern of ancient churches, of a dome on top of a square or a rectangle. Even in this humble tradition, these ancient patterns have continued. And you see it here in this next one by Moyeno. The same pattern continues, but with a slight Baroque flair. We have the rectangular image. Even this one has a more of an elaborate frame. And then you have instead of a dome or a full circle, it's hinted at a circle with this lunette or a scallop on the top, which is a prominent Baroque feature. So even though it is not precisely a half circle on a square, the form hints at it, and that continuity is maintained in a local version of it, let's say. So this is San Ramon Nonato. This is painted in the early 1800s. And again, one of the finer compositions, finer frames. And the lunette, which is not ubiquitous, not in every retablo does it feature a lunette like this. But nowadays, it's so common, it's so distinctive to the retablo traditions. It's taken on perhaps even a more wider prominence than in the original retablos. Here's another one by one of the Aragon brothers. I think this one was just Jose Aragon, the other brother. But in this one, you see no lunette, which is common. But this is Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Again, recognizable with her scapulars that she's holding and the infant Christ is holding. And this time the curtain is hinted at or even converged with the clouds in the top. And nevertheless, there are some abstract kind of space fillers in the background. The retablo tradition continued on to the modern era, even after New Mexico became part of the independent state of Mexico, and then later territory of the United States, and later a state of the United States. And now, even in this modern, postmodern era, the retablo tradition continues. The painter at the forefront, the artist leading the charge for the retablo tradition, is undoubtedly Charlie Carrillo, who is almost single-handedly caused a renaissance of the art using natural materials, original pigments, techniques. But he's also done an amazing job in kind of drawing out maybe a synthesis of the retablo styles. So you'll see he's continued a lot of the best qualities of the retablos and continued them, like Jose Rafael Aragon's work, for example, the fineness of the features of the face, the pattern of the way he makes the beards, But he's also added not modern touches. Like he has some icons, some retablos of the three kings, and they're in a vintage cars. Right, he has a whole series of saints driving cars, and this is also a touch of the Hispanic retablo tradition here of localizing, incarnating the santos, the divine, um, into the present, the here and now, right? So there's a closeness, a familiarity with the Santero tradition that I think he's bringing out with his series of cars and Santos and cars. But also, like I said earlier, he um, very much faithfully maintains the classic Christian iconographic tradition with Saint Augustine, with the Blessed Virgin Mary, um, retaining the curtains and the lunettes, the borders, um, and in his Reredo that he's made here in these pictures, you even see he's followed the Solomonic columns, popular in the Baroque period. In a big way, been very faithful to the um, Santero tradition of the retablos and bultos. Then another very popular um, retablo maker is Lynn Garlick, and she has made the retablos widely available online in many stores. She has a great book, a little book of saints, where she explains and features her work. Um, she has also continued the retablo tradition, um, let's say in a commercially available way. She has mass produced retablos available. She's become very successful in that as well, spreading the retablo tradition far and wide outside of New Mexico. Another important part of the retablo tradition today is the traditional Spanish market, hosted in the summer in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And you see here a scene of the cathedral in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the top left. It's a huge attraction. Hundreds, thousands of people, certainly thousands of people come to Santa Fe each year for this. And the retablo tradition is shown there alive and well. I wanted to bring also to the forefront the meaning of the Santero tradition, the meaning of these sacred images. Um, and in the Christian tradition, throughout the world, you have the tradition of these household icons, sacred images. In Russia, for example, in many Eastern Christian lands, this tradition has been maintained in a very similar way to New Mexico, with its own regional differences. Um, but I like this image, this painting from Russia, that highlights the simple pattern of devotion, candles in front of the santos, asking for their help, and really um, featuring the saints as active participants in your daily life. Right, a home with no pictures of saints um, is it's possible to have a relationship with the divine and with the saints, but we are physical creatures, physical beings, and having a physical image of the saints and Christ allows us to have a visual presence of them. That's the domestic sphere. It's powerful um, presence of the saints and of God in the family home, but also in the public sphere. There is a great tradition in New Mexico of the processions, and this goes back, of course, to the colonial period. And here's an image of the La Conquistadora image, which is a statue um, brought to New Mexico in colonial times. Um, and it represents also the um, reclaiming of New Mexico by the Hispanic colonizers after the Pueblo Revolt in the late 17th century, 1680s. And this gives you an idea, though, of the presence of the santos and the bultos in the life of the community, oftentimes in times of need or in drought or in distress or war. The Santos will be processed around the village asking for help, asking for protection, much in the same way that in Constantinople throughout the Middle Ages, when enemies approached, um, the images of saints or the belt of the Virgin or the veil of the Virgin will be processed around the walls of the city, or in Rome, or in many other places in throughout Christian civilization. The practice remains the same. Um, it's distinct from idolatry. Idolatry, of course, being the image of the God is the God itself. That's not the case in Christian iconography. The image of the saint is not the saint itself or not God himself, but it is a window into heaven, or um, a way to access that saint who is in heaven. So this is reminded to us in the Seventh Ecumenical Council. It says that, and this is back in the 8th century, when a person shows honor to a sacred image, the reverence they give is transmitted to that person in heaven. And this was, again, the Seventh Ecumenical Council, one of the councils agreed on by all Christians everywhere for these 2,000 years. And a key aspect of this retablo tradition is that continuity with the entire Christian iconography as a whole. The compositions tend to be very stable over many centuries. For example, take one of the most enduring images, which is the crucifixion scene here. And since the early medieval period, this image has been depicted in practically the same way. And by the time this retablo on the right was made in New Mexico in the 1820s, it had been transmitted virtually unchanged for more than 1,000 years. In the center is Jesus crucified on the cross, with his Blessed Mother to his right and the beloved disciple John to his left. Often there are angels on either side, and sometimes other characters like the centurion and Mary Magdalene. There are regional changes and stylistic differences over the years, but the structure of the composition has remained remarkably consistent. And in New Mexico, the function of the piece of art retained the ancient character as a window into the divine, a place where a person can not only be reminded of spiritual ideals, but also be in contact with the divine in person. New Mexicans understood and continue to understand the power of sacred images and kept the tradition alive, even on the frontiers of the Baroque. So thanks everybody for joining me through this video. Hope that it helped to highlight this important art form and see how there's this thread of continuity from the ancient Christian tradition all the way through Spanish colonial, Baroque, and into this art form that is alive and well in New Mexico and now throughout the world today. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you in the next video.